Have you ever wondered what would happen if you were still there, hearing every voice, seeing every face, yet no one could hear you back? It began as an ordinary family day by the water, laughter in the background. And then, without warning, a single flash turned everything upside down, so fast that the mind can't even catch up to the moment it's gone. In the next few minutes, I'm going to share what I experienced in that space between life and death. What I saw, what I felt, and the one realization that changed the way I understand love, purpose, and what comes after. The truth is, nothing about that morning suggested it would become the dividing line of my life. Everything before it and everything after. I was living what most people would call a full, ordinary life. I had a career that demanded precision and responsibility, a family I loved deeply, routines that anchored me, and a quiet confidence that tomorrow would look a lot like today. I wasn't searching for answers about the universe. I wasn't questioning existence or wondering what waited beyond this world. I was busy with work, busy with people, busy with the simple mechanics of living. That August morning found us gathered at a lake in the Muskoka region of Ontario, the kind of place families return to year after year because it feels safe, familiar, and timeless. My wife's family had a tradition, 5 birthdays clustered into the same month, so instead of separate celebrations, we held one large communal gathering. We'd rented a pavilion near the water. There were about 25 people there, children running in every direction, their laughter cutting through the warm air. The lake lay calm and wide behind us, reflecting the sky like polished glass. I had been assigned the barbecue. It was the kind of task I enjoyed. Hands busy, mind quiet. The smell of grilling food mixed with pine and lake water. I remember the heat from the grill on my face, the low hum of conversation behind me, the way time seemed to stretch in that gentle, unhurried way it does on summer mornings. I was focused, almost insulated from everything else. At some point, a thought surfaced, simple, unremarkable. I should call my mother. She wasn't going to be there that day, and something nudged me to check in on her. This was before mobile phones had become part of our bodies, before reaching someone took no effort at all. There was a payphone attached to the front of the building just beyond the pavilion. I asked someone to watch the grill and walked around the corner. As I moved, I didn't notice the sky. I didn't notice the shift in the air. My back had been to the lake all morning, and I had no idea that a massive thundercloud had quietly formed overhead, dark, heavy, and waiting. I picked up the receiver and dialed. The line rang. Once, twice, 5 times. I don't remember exactly how many. She didn't answer. I remember feeling a faint disappointment. Nothing more. I lifted the receiver away from my ear, preparing to hang up. That's when the world changed. There was no warning, no gradual build, no sense that something was about to go wrong. In a fraction of a second, a blinding flash exploded from the phone itself. Pure white light, violent and absolute. It struck my face with a force I didn't have time to process. At the same instant, a sound like a cannon cracking open the sky filled my ears. I knew exactly what it was. Lightning. The impact threw me backward as if I weighed nothing at all. My body was launched through the air, helpless, uncontrolled. And yet, this is the part that still defies explanation. As I was being hurled backward, I felt a strange sensation of moving forward at the same time. 2 directions, 2 experiences colliding. My mind couldn't reconcile it. Fear didn't arrive first, confusion did. In the split second that followed, I tried to understand what was happening, why my body felt distant, why the world seemed to stutter, why time itself appeared to fracture. I had no sense of pain yet, only a profound disorientation, as if reality had slipped out of alignment. And just before everything went dark, before my body could hit the ground, before breath could leave my lungs, before my heart could make its next decision, I realized something was terribly, irrevocably wrong. If this speaks to you, subscribe, comment your city, and say amen for a prayer. If you've ever sat at a family gathering and felt the quiet comfort of ordinary life, the kind that makes you believe the day will unfold exactly as planned, Then you'll understand why what happened next still feels impossible to me. That summer, August had become a month of celebration in my wife's family. 5 birthdays, all crowded into the same stretch of weeks. Instead of separate parties, we did what families do when they've been together long enough to know their own rhythm. We made it communal. 1 pavilion, 1 cake table, 1 set of folding chairs and paper plates. Everyone showing up with something: salads in plastic bowls, coolers full of drinks, little wrapped gifts balanced on laps. Nothing fancy, just family. We chose a place by the water. Sleepy Hollow Lake was the name back when it happened, but it could have been any quiet lakeside park, the kind where time slows down. We were there early, because families with children are always early when you give them an open space and a reason to run. By mid-morning, there were about 25 of us. Kids darted between the picnic tables like sparrows, their sneakers slapping against the concrete, shrieking and laughing in that bright, careless way children have. Adults called out warnings that were mostly ignored. "Don't run with that. Watch the stairs. Leave the ducks alone," the usual chorus of love disguised as supervision. I was given the barbecue. It's funny what we remember. I can still see the grill lid shining in the sun, feel the weight of the spatula in my hand, smell the first burst of smoke when the fat hit the heat. There's a kind of peace in being useful at a gathering. You don't have to talk constantly. You don't have to perform. You just do your job and let the day move around you. The weather felt perfect, warm but not heavy. A light breeze off the lake that kept the air from going stale. You could smell cut grass and lake water and charcoal all at once. If I closed my eyes, I could have believed the whole world was that small. Family voices, birds in the trees, the soft slap of water against shore. My back was to the lake while I cooked. I didn't see what was happening behind me. I didn't notice the sky shifting. I didn't notice the air changing texture the way it does before a storm, like the world is holding its breath. I was focused on timing. Burgers, hot dogs, keeping the kids' food separated from the adults, remembering who wanted what. Somewhere in the middle of that ordinary, busy morning, a thought came to me, simple and familiar. I should call my mother. She wasn't coming to the party, and for reasons I still can't explain, I suddenly felt the need to check on her. Not panic, not dread, just that quiet nudge of responsibility and love. Call her, make sure she's okay. This was before mobile phones were everywhere. It's hard to remember now how different that world was, how calling someone meant you had to go to a specific place and stand there, exposed to everything around you, tethered to a cord and a receiver, and a small circle of privacy. I asked someone to cover the grill for a minute, wiped my hands on a paper towel, and walked around the front of the building. The pavilion had stairs, and attached near the entrance was a payphone, one of those old public phones that looks sturdy enough to survive a war. I remember the metal surface was warm from the sun. I remember the smell of sunscreen on my hands as I picked up the receiver. I dialed her number. The line rang. Once, twice, again and again. 5, 6, 7 rings, something like that. The sound was steady and patient, and in between each ring I heard the muffled life behind me. A child laughing, a cooler lid snapping shut, someone calling another name. All of it normal. All of it safe. She didn't answer. I felt that mild, everyday irritation you feel when a call doesn't connect. Not anger, just a small resistance. I was already mentally shifting back toward the grill, back toward the tasks that made sense. I was getting ready to hang up. And in the instant I pulled the receiver away from my ear, everything in me registered something I didn't understand, an almost physical pressure, like the air had tightened. I didn't have time to turn around. I didn't have time to see the thundercloud that had formed over the lake while my back was turned. I didn't have time to do anything except move my hand toward the cradle. A flash detonated out of the phone. Not a spark, not a flicker. A violent, blinding burst of light, white so intense it felt solid, shot straight into my face. At the exact same moment, a crack split the air so loudly it didn't sound like thunder. It sounded like the world being hit with a hammer. And I knew. Lightning. The force of it didn't feel like being pushed. It felt like being erased from where I was standing and thrown somewhere else. My body went weightless. I was yanked backward as if I were made of cloth. I remember the sensation of flying, of my feet leaving the ground, of my stomach lurching as the world tilted. But what terrified me wasn't just the impact. It was the impossibility of what I felt next. As my body was being thrown backward, I felt myself moving forward at the same time. Two directions, two realities. My mind tried to hold both and failed. Confusion hit harder than fear. I couldn't make sense of what my senses were telling me. I couldn't even find a thought that matched the moment. The pavilion stairs, the phone, the sunlight, everything blurred as if it was slipping out of alignment. I wanted to grab onto something, to control my fall, to shout, to do anything human and practical. But there was no time for resistance. Because in that split second, right before my body hit the ground, right before breath and heartbeat could decide what came next, I understood with sudden cold clarity. This was the moment my life was about to end. If this moves you, subscribe, comment your city, and say amen for a prayer. There was no snap of darkness, no tunnel of fear, no sense of being taken. It was more like waking into a different kind of morning, one that didn't use sun or sky the way we do here. I became aware of brightness, but it wasn't harsh. It didn't glare or sting. It held me the way warm water holds you when you stop fighting and finally let yourself float. At first, I couldn't tell where I ended and where everything else began. The place around me wasn't empty, but it also wasn't crowded with objects the way a room is. It had dimension without weight, space without distance. The closest comparison I have is standing at the edge of a lake when the mist lifts and you can suddenly see the far shoreline. Only here, the clarity wasn't visual alone. It was emotional. I could feel the vastness, and instead of shrinking me, it steadied me. Light was everywhere, but it didn't come from a single point like a bulb. It seemed to come from within the environment itself, as if the fabric of whatever this was carried its own illumination. Colors existed, but they were not the blunt, flat colors of paint. They moved, they breathed, they had depth, like music has depth, layered tones that you don't just see, you recognize. There was a pale gold that felt like reassurance. There was a soft blue that felt like clarity. There was a kind of pearlescent white that wasn't empty. It was full, saturated with something I can only call goodness, not as an idea but as a living substance. And between them, everything shimmered, as if reality itself were made of gentle motion. I realized I was moving, but not in the way you walk. There was no sense of feet, no friction, no effort. It was closer to drifting, carried along by an intelligent current. And it wasn't random. It had direction, quiet, purposeful direction, like being guided by a river that knows exactly where it's going. That's when I felt it. A river of pure, positive energy. I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean it the way you might say you feel heat from a fire. This was an actual current, an enormous flow, made of something that translated in my mind as love and peace. But again, not as words, as presence, as substance. It surrounded me and moved through me with such gentleness that my first instinct, my lifelong instinct to analyze, to brace, to control, simply fell away. And the strange thing was, I didn't miss it. The moment that current wrapped around me, I felt an emotional safety so complete, it made my entire life's anxieties feel like a misunderstanding. I'd carried tension for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like not to. Here, there was no tension to carry, no need to perform, no need to prove anything, no need to defend myself from anyone's judgment, not even my own. I belonged there, not in the polite way you belong at someone's house when they offer you a seat. In the deeper way you belong to your own skin. I had a sudden quiet recognition, as if this environment knew me intimately and had always known me, even while I was down there pretending I was separate, pretending I was alone. That recognition broke something open in me. I had been so certain all my life that identity was bound to the body, that the mind lived in the brain, that the heart was just a pump, that me was an arrangement of tissue and electrical signals. But as I drifted in that current, I realized I was thinking with complete clarity. My personality was intact. My sense of humor, my vocabulary, my way of reacting, me, was still present. Whoever I was, I still was. And down below, somewhere far, far away, though distance didn't feel like distance anymore, there was a body. A physical form. A piece of the story. But it wasn't the whole story. It wasn't even the most important part. That realization didn't frighten me. It relieved me. I remember feeling something close to laughter. Not mocking laughter, but the soft kind you feel when you've been wrong about something for a long time, and the truth is kinder than you ever expected. I had spent years fearing death as if it were annihilation, and now I was immersed in a reality that made the word death feel oddly inaccurate. The current carried me toward a light source off to my right. It wasn't a spotlight. It wasn't a blinding, overpowering glare. It was a presence that radiated, and what it radiated was not only light but that same substance. The peace, the love, the sense of rightness. And I could see it moving outward like waves. Not water waves, more like gentle sine waves, living patterns that pulsed with intelligence. And as I watched, something in me understood without being taught. That energy was everything. Not in everything. Everything. The trees, the lake-like expanse I thought I saw, the space itself, the movement, the colors. Every part of it was made of that same living current. As I turned my attention outward, the environment revealed itself as a coherent whole, stitched together by one unified fabric. It was as if I had spent my entire life staring at separate threads, and now I was finally allowed to see the tapestry. I felt awe, but it was quiet. There was no frantic amazement, no desperation to explain it, no need to shout, "This is unbelievable!" Because here, disbelief didn't fit. It wasn't that I was being convinced of something. It was that I was remembering something I had forgotten. And the more I relaxed into that remembering, the more I noticed something else. Something even more unsettling in its tenderness. I was being known. Not watched, not inspected. Known. The way a parent knows the face of their child in the dark. The way a lifelong friend knows the truth behind your silence. I couldn't see a figure standing in front of me, but I could feel awareness. Vast, calm, and intimate. Present in the light and in the current, and somehow within me as well. I realized I had no fear of it. No fear of judgment. No fear of punishment. Only the sensation that I was safe to be completely honest, even with parts of myself I had spent years hiding. Then a thought rose in me, not like panic, but like a soft, sharp clarity. If this love is the substance behind everything, if it's what reality is made of, then why do we spend our lives down there acting as if we're separate, frightened, and alone? And as that question formed, it opened into an even deeper one. One that hovered before me like a doorway. If I feel more myself here than I ever did in my own body, then what exactly have I been calling life all this time? I don't know exactly when the shift happened. There was no announcement, no doorway marked with a sign. The current simply carried me onward, gently easing me into something quieter, more inward. The vastness didn't disappear, but my attention narrowed, as if the environment itself knew it was time for me to look not outward but back. I found myself moving through what felt like a corridor, though it didn't have walls in the way we understand them. It was more like a passage of awareness, focused, intimate. Along this passage, images began to appear. At first, they looked like still photographs suspended in space, softly lit, floating at a comfortable distance. They were moments from my life. Not the dramatic ones first, not the lightning, not triumphs or disasters. Ordinary moments. A kitchen table, a hospital hallway, a car interior at night. Faces I knew instantly. My wife, my children, colleagues, friends, even people I hadn't thought about in decades. As I drifted closer to the first image, it changed. It didn't simply animate. It opened. Suddenly, I wasn't looking at the moment. I was in it. But not in the way memory usually works. I wasn't reliving it as myself. I was reliving it as everyone involved. The realization landed softly but firmly. This was a life review, and yet it wasn't anything like the courtroom-style judgment people imagine. There was no voice listing sins, no scale weighing good against bad, no condemnation, no threat. What unfolded was far more unsettling and far more loving than judgment could ever be. I experienced my actions through their emotional impact. When I saw a moment where I had spoken sharply, I didn't feel guilt imposed from outside. I felt the ripple of that sharpness as it landed in the other person's chest. I felt the tightening in their stomach, the flicker of doubt it planted, the way it echoed later when they were alone. And then, this surprised me, I felt my own intention at the same time. Not excuses, context. I felt the stress I'd been under, the fatigue, the fear of failing, the distraction that had made me careless with my words. The review didn't erase responsibility, but it wrapped it in understanding so complete it was impossible to hide from, and equally impossible to be crushed by. In moments where I had been kind, the effect was luminous. I felt warmth spread outward, not just in the person I helped, but further, into people I never met, moments I never witnessed. A small gesture, something I'd long forgotten, became a chain of quiet goodness, branching far beyond what I'd imagined. The realization was humbling. The smallest acts mattered more than I'd ever known. Time didn't move linearly here. Moments rose up not in chronological order, but in emotional relevance. A decision from my 20s appeared beside a moment from my 40s, connected by a thread of consequence I had never seen while living it. And always, the focus was on feeling. I felt how it was to be loved by me. I felt how it was to be disappointed by me. I felt how it was to be ignored. I felt how it was to be encouraged. Each experience arrived whole, complete, undeniable. There was no escape from it, but there was also no hostility in it. The environment itself seemed to say, "This is simply the truth. Look at it." I remember one moment in particular. It was small, insignificant, I would have said if you'd asked me back then. Someone had come to me, seeking reassurance, seeking presence. I had been busy, distracted. I had listened with half my attention, offered a practical response, and moved on. In the review, I felt their quiet deflation, not dramatic pain, something subtler. The sense of being unseen, the moment they decided not to ask again. And then, layered on top of that, I felt my own inner rush at the time. The belief that I was being efficient, responsible, doing what needed to be done. Seeing both at once broke something open in me. I understood with painful clarity how often I had confused productivity with presence. Tears came then. Not physical tears, but an emotional release that moved through me like a wave. And in that wave was regret. Yes, but also compassion. I saw myself as a human being doing the best I could with the awareness I had at the time. No one scolded me for it. No one needed to. The truth itself was enough. Other moments followed. Some joyful, some difficult. Times I had stood up for someone. Times I had stayed silent when I shouldn't have. Times I had loved well. Times I had loved clumsily. Every single one was experienced from all sides, layered and complete. What struck me most was this: I was never alone in any of it. Throughout the review, that same presence, the awareness woven into the light, remained with me. Not observing, accompanying, sharing the experience without commentary, without distance. It felt as though I was being invited to understand myself the way something infinitely patient already did. And slowly, a pattern emerged. The review didn't seem interested in my achievements, my titles, my intellect, or my status. It lingered on moments of connection, moments of empathy, moments where I chose others over myself, or failed to. The realization tightened around my heart. What mattered most in my life had almost nothing to do with what I thought mattered while I was living it. And that recognition made me feel exposed in a way I had never allowed myself to feel before. Because if love and awareness were the true measure of a life, then I wasn't sure, in that moment, whether I had lived as fully, or as generously, as I could have. The life review didn't end with a closing scene. It softened. It dissolved back into that same living current as if I were being gently released from something deeply intimate. I felt open, exposed, yes, but not wounded. More like a door had been unlocked inside me, one I hadn't known was there. And then, without sound or motion, something else began. It wasn't a voice. There were no words forming sentences, yet understanding arrived with more clarity than any conversation I'd ever had. It was as if meaning itself was being placed directly into me, complete, whole, undeniable. I didn't have to interpret it. I didn't have to translate it. I simply knew. The first truth came quietly, almost tenderly. You are not finished. Not as a command, not as an accusation, as a statement of fact. Along with it came an overwhelming sense of continuity. My life, every choice, every detour, every failure and kindness, was not random. It was part of a larger movement, one I could finally sense now that I wasn't trapped in the narrow tunnel of time. I could feel how each experience had shaped my awareness, how every struggle had carved out space for understanding, how even my resistance had taught me something necessary. Another layer of knowing unfolded. You are here to learn how to love beyond yourself. That phrase doesn't fully capture it, because it wasn't about moral instruction. It wasn't a rule. It was more like remembering the rules of a game I had agreed to play long ago. Life wasn't a punishment. It wasn't a test designed to trap me. It was a proving ground, not to impress anyone, but to develop something within me. I understood that growth didn't come from comfort. It came from friction, from limitation, from forgetting who we really are, and then choosing again and again to act with compassion anyway. The knowledge deepened. I sensed that consciousness doesn't end with one lifetime, that we move through experiences the way students move through lessons, not all at once, not without mistakes, but always with the opportunity to evolve. There was no rush, no clock ticking, but there was direction, and that direction mattered. I became aware of pathways, not roads or tunnels, but orientations of being. One bent inward, obsessed with self, control, accumulation, fear. The other bent outward, toward service, connection, generosity, and love. The insight was simple and devastating in its clarity. Only one of those paths leads forward. The other circles endlessly. There was no condemnation attached to that realization. No threat, just truth. The way gravity is truth. The way fire burns because that's its nature. Growth required orientation toward others, toward lifting rather than extracting, toward giving rather than protecting the self at all costs. And then, this was the part that surprised me most, I felt something like humor. A gentle, knowing amusement, not at me, but with me, as if to say, you've been circling these ideas your whole life. Now you finally see why they mattered. More understanding flowed in waves. I sensed that communication with this realm, this source, this presence, was always available. Not through rituals or special words, but through stillness, through listening. Through the first quiet thought that arrives before the mind rushes in to analyze and distort it. Guidance had never been absent. I had simply been too busy, too noisy inside to hear it. Then came the awareness of others. Not faces, not figures, but presences. Supportive intelligences that felt familiar in a way I can't explain. Helpers, guides, companions who had known me longer than this life alone. They weren't there to control me. They had never forced my choices. They were there to nudge, to whisper, to wait patiently when I ignored them. And suddenly, with startling clarity, I understood why what had happened to me had happened the way it did. It had been orchestrated, not in a manipulative sense, but in a precise one. The timing, the storm, the nurse who happened to be nearby, the exact balance between destruction and survival. Too much power, and there would have been no return. Too little, and I wouldn't have been shaken awake. It had taken that kind of interruption to get my attention. I felt a strange blend of humility and gratitude. I saw how stubborn I had been, how deeply rooted in my own certainty, how resistant to listening unless the message arrived wrapped in undeniable force. And still, there was no shame in that realization, only acceptance. Another truth arrived, heavier than the others. What you have experienced is not meant only for you. I felt the weight of that, not as burden, but as responsibility. Not everyone would hear it. Not everyone would believe it. That wasn't the point. The point was to carry it honestly, to live differently because of it, to let the understanding shape my choices, my priorities, my presence with others. I sensed that this would not be easy. Returning would mean forgetting parts of this clarity. The density of physical life would dull the sharpness of what I now understood. Doubt would creep back in. Fear would return. Habits would reassert themselves. But something essential would remain, a seed, a memory deeper than memory. And then, slowly, unmistakably, the current began to shift. There was a subtle resistance now, not from me, but from the movement itself, like a river approaching a fork. I felt myself being drawn in a direction that felt smaller, denser, heavier, and for the first time since arriving there, I felt panic. No, panic isn't the right word. Grief. I didn't want to leave. The peace here wasn't something I could replicate down there. The clarity, the safety, the belonging. All of it felt more real than anything I had ever known. I realized, with a sharp ache, that returning meant stepping back into confusion, into pain, into limitation. But the knowing came anyway, firm, unyielding, loving. It is not your time. I resisted it with everything I had, not with words, because words didn't exist here, but with intention, with refusal, with pleading that didn't sound like sound. I felt myself reaching toward the light, toward the current, toward the presence that had wrapped me in understanding. And even as I did, another realization settled in, heavy and unavoidable. If I stayed, I would abandon something I had promised to finish. And that was the moment I knew. No matter how complete this place felt, I was being asked to return. The moment I understood that I was being sent back, everything in me pushed against it. Not politely, not calmly. With a raw, instinctive resistance that surprised even me. I didn't argue in words. There were no words there, but my entire being recoiled. I clung to the current, to the light, to that vast presence that felt more like home than anything I had ever known. The idea of returning felt unbearable, not frightening, devastating. I had just remembered who I was. Why would I choose to forget again? A grief unlike anything I'd ever experienced rose through me. It wasn't fear of pain or fear of dying. I already knew death wasn't what I'd been taught it was. This was grief at the thought of separation. Separation from clarity, from belonging, from a love so complete it required no explanation. I felt myself pleading. Please don't make me go back. It wasn't defiance. It was sorrow. The kind a child feels when they realize the warmth they're wrapped in can't last forever. The kind that comes when you finally stop running, and then are told you must stand up again and walk. The presence didn't withdraw. If anything, it felt closer. And with that closeness came something firm and immovable. Not harsh, not cold, but absolute. Like gravity, like the tide. There was no negotiation left to be had. I sensed that returning wasn't a punishment. It was a continuation. A next step I couldn't yet see from where I was standing. Staying would freeze me in understanding without allowing me to live it. Still, I resisted. I tried to hold on to the feeling. to anchor myself in the peace, to memorize it somehow so I could carry it with me. But the environment was already shifting. The current that had carried me so effortlessly now felt like it was moving in reverse, drawing me toward something dense and distant. The light began to recede, not vanishing but pulling away as if I were being gently but relentlessly turned around. That's when the heaviness began. At first it was subtle, a sense of compression, like the space around me was thickening. Then it intensified. The freedom of movement I'd had evaporated, replaced by a feeling of narrowing, of being funneled into something far too small to contain what I now knew myself to be. Panic surfaced again, sharper this time. Not fear of annihilation, but fear of confinement. I could feel the edges of something closing in on me, and with it came a dawning awareness of weight, of form, of limitation. The vastness I had floated in moments before collapsed inward, folding me back toward a single point. I didn't want a body. I didn't want breath. I didn't want gravity or pain or noise or confusion. I wanted to remain where I was whole. And then, without warning, it happened. It felt like being slammed into myself, not gently, not gradually, violently. The re-entry was abrupt, brutal, disorienting. One instant I was expansive and unbounded. The next I was crushed into density, into flesh, into something unbearably tight. Sensation rushed in all at once, overwhelming and chaotic. There was pressure, immense pressure, followed by a sharp, searing pain that tore through me with no context and no mercy. I became aware of my body not as me, but as an object I had been forced back into. Everything hurt. Pain didn't arrive politely. It exploded. Electrical, burning, jagged. It wasn't localized at first. It was everywhere, screaming through nerves that felt raw and exposed. My chest felt heavy, compressed, as if something had been sitting on it for far too long. My limbs were distant, unresponsive, foreign. And with the pain came loss. A loss so sudden it felt like emotional whiplash. The peace was gone. The clarity dimmed instantly, like waking from a dream and realizing the meaning slipped away faster than you can grab it. I could feel it leaving me, still close, still present, but receding, retreating behind a wall I hadn't known existed until it slammed shut. I wanted to cry out, not from pain, but from heartbreak. No, don't let me forget. Please don't let me forget. But now there were sounds. Muffled, distorted, chaotic. Voices overlapped. Movements scraped against the ground. Something pressed rhythmically against my chest. There was urgency in the air, sharp and frantic, completely unlike the stillness I had just left. I couldn't respond. I couldn't move. I was trapped inside the body. Aware but powerless, caught between worlds. I could sense hands on me, could hear commands being shouted, could feel jolts of sensation that made no sense yet demanded everything from me. Time fractured again. Moments stretched and collapsed. Pain surged, receded, surged again, and beneath it all was the ache of separation, the deep, hollow grief of being torn from something sacred. Then, slowly, something shifted. The pressure eased. Air forced its way in. My chest spasmed, burning as breath returned in harsh, unfamiliar gulps. The pain localized, sharpened, became human. The chaos outside began to organize into recognizable sounds. And after what felt like an eternity, but may have only been minutes, I felt a faint tug upward, as if consciousness itself were surfacing through thick water. Darkness thinned, light filtered in, not the living light from before, but harsh, fractured, edged, and with an effort that felt monumental, as though I were lifting a weight far heavier than myself. I opened my eyes. The first thing I saw was sky, real sky, pale and ordinary, with edges that didn't shimmer and light that didn't feel alive. The second thing I heard was a voice close to me, urgent and steady, and then a second voice layered over it, and then many. Human voices. Concerned voices. The kind of voices that belong to people trying to pull someone back from the edge. I tried to speak, but my mouth felt wrong. heavy and dry like it didn't remember how words were made. I tried again. My lips moved, and something came out. But it wasn't what I meant. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't anything I would have chosen. "It's okay," I heard myself say, thick and slurred. "I'm a doctor." Even as the words left me, I knew how absurd they were. My mind was still split between worlds, one foot on the shore of what I'd just experienced, the other sinking back into the density of the physical. Someone near me laughed softly, not cruelly, tenderly, as if laughter was the only appropriate response to the strange, fragile things people say when they've just returned from the brink. "Well," she said, "you weren't a minute ago." I wanted to tell her everything in that moment. I wanted to grab her hand, look her in the eyes, and say, "You don't understand what you just did." Not because she saved my body, though she did, but because her hands, her timing, her presence had been part of something so precisely arranged that luck felt like a shallow word. But the truth is, I couldn't do any of that. I could barely think straight. My body was a storm of sensation, burning, aching, trembling. My heart felt as if it had been restarted by force, which in a way it had. My chest rose and fell with a roughness I couldn't ignore. Every breath felt borrowed, and beneath all that physical discomfort was something far stranger. I was angry. Not at anyone there, not at the people who were helping me, at the fact that I was back. It feels harsh to admit, but it's the truth. I didn't want to be in my body. I didn't want to be in that heavy, limited world again. I didn't want the noise. I didn't want the confusion. I didn't want the constant tug of worry and responsibility and time, because I had just been somewhere that didn't require any of those things. And being ripped away from it felt like losing the best part of myself. The ambulance arrived, police, radios, questions, a stretcher that I didn't want, people speaking to me as if I were fragile, as if I might slip away again with the next breath. I remember insisting, stubbornly, irrationally, that I didn't want to go to the hospital. There was a part of me that resisted being turned into a case, a chart, a series of measurements. I told myself I was fine. I told them I was fine. But inside, I wasn't fine at all. Because the real aftermath wasn't what the lightning did to my body. It was what the experience did to my sense of reality. When my family took me home, the world looked the same, and yet it didn't. Trees were still trees. Roads were still roads. My wife's face was still my wife's face. But everything felt thinner. Like the surface of life was no longer convincing. Like I'd been let in on a secret and now had to pretend I didn't know it. I called friends, medical colleagues I trusted, people with steady minds and practical instincts. I wanted reassurance that I hadn't had some kind of hallucination, that my brain hadn't simply invented a comforting story while it was shutting down. I wanted them to say, "Yes, this is explainable," because if it was explainable in a purely physical sense, then maybe I could tuck it away and go back to living the way I always had. They examined me, checked my heart, looked at my neurological function, told me I was incredibly lucky, that most people didn't walk away from what had happened, that it could have been far worse. And physically, they were right. I had burns, small, almost insulting in their size considering the force that had passed through me. One on my face where the lightning entered, one on my foot where it exited. Tiny marks that hurt like fire. It baffled me how something so small could burn so fiercely, how the body could register pain so sharply from what looked like nothing. But the real injury, the one I couldn't explain to anyone, was invisible. For about a week, my mind behaved oddly. I couldn't remember names the way I normally could. I'd look at people I'd known for years and feel the information about them sitting clearly in my head, what they'd been treated for, their history, their story, yet the name itself hovered just out of reach like a word on the tip of the tongue that never arrives. The same thing happened with diseases. I could describe them, explain them, but naming them felt impossible. It was a strange kind of humility. And perhaps it was also a warning. You came back different. Don't pretend you didn't. After that week, my mental function returned. The names came back, the labels returned. The world tried to settle into its old grooves. I went back to work. I went back to routines. I smiled at the right times. I nodded through conversations. I did what people do after something terrible happens. I tried to normalize it. But inside, I was mystified, and not in an intellectual way, though there was plenty of that too. It was a deeper kind of bewilderment. The kind that doesn't leave you alone when you're washing dishes or driving at night or staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. I kept replaying the chain of improbabilities. What were the chances of being struck by lightning in the first place? What were the chances it would lose enough current to stop my heart without destroying my body entirely? What were the chances a nurse would be standing right behind me, waiting to use that same phone, prepared to begin CPR immediately in a place that felt like the middle of nowhere? All of it, stacked together, felt too precise, too orchestrated. And once that thought took root, it changed the way I looked at everything. Because if it wasn't random, if it wasn't just weather and physics and bad luck, then it meant something. It meant my life wasn't simply a series of accidents. It meant there was intention behind the veil of ordinary days. And that idea was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it implied I wasn't alone. Terrifying because it implied I might have been asleep in my own life. I tried to talk about it. At first, only in small pieces. To my wife, carefully, because I didn't want to frighten her. To close friends, cautiously, because I didn't want to sound ridiculous. And I discovered quickly that language is a blunt tool for something like this. How do you tell someone you felt love as substance? How do you explain light that knows you? How do you describe a life review that contains more truth than memory, yet offers no condemnation? Words made it sound like fantasy, or religion, or hallucination. And it wasn't any of those things. Not in the way people assume. What I brought back wasn't a story I believed. It was something I had experienced. And that distinction mattered. The strangest part was how it altered my fear. I didn't become fearless in a reckless way. I didn't start driving faster or taking stupid risks. But something fundamental shifted. The fear of death, the fear that had always lived quietly underneath everything, loosened its grip. Not because I wanted to die, because I no longer believed death was the end. And if death wasn't the end, then life wasn't just about surviving. It wasn't just about accumulating. It wasn't just about keeping everything controlled and predictable. Life became something else, something more fragile and more meaningful at the same time. I began to notice moments differently. A conversation at a kitchen table carried weight. A kind gesture felt like an echo of something larger. Even irritation, my own impatience, my own sharpness, stood out more clearly, as if the life review had left a faint imprint on my conscience that wouldn't allow me to dismiss my impact so easily anymore. I became more spiritual, less interested in labels, less interested in being right in the way I used to be. Not because I rejected faith, but because what I experienced didn't feel like a denomination. It felt like the underlying fabric of reality. And yet, even with all of that, I struggled, because returning meant living in a world where most people hadn't seen what I had seen. They still feared death the way I once did. They still believed they were alone. They still measured life by things that now felt strangely shallow. I didn't blame them. I had been one of them. But I couldn't unsee what I'd seen. Some nights I would sit quietly and ask myself the same question that kept coming back like a tide. If that love is real, and if it's the substance behind everything, then what is it asking of me now, here, in this ordinary world? And so I'll ask you something, gently, the way it was asked of me without words. If you knew, truly knew, that love is what remains, what would you change about the way you're living today? I've spent years trying to understand what that experience was, for. Not in the sense of dissecting it, there's a limit to what analysis can reach. But in the quieter way, we search for meaning when something changes us at the core. The kind of understanding that doesn't arrive all at once, but settles slowly, like dust after a storm. For a long time after I returned, I thought the experience was about death, about proving there was something beyond this life. about answering the oldest question we carry in silence. But the more time passed, the clearer it became that it wasn't really about dying at all. It was about living. What I was shown, what I felt, was not a destination reserved for the end of the road. It was a reminder of what has always been present, woven quietly through every ordinary moment. The love I experienced there was not foreign. It wasn't exotic. It wasn't something that suddenly came into existence when my heart stopped. It was familiar, painfully familiar, as if I had known it once long ago and spent a lifetime forgetting. The peace wasn't the absence of struggle. It was the absence of illusion, the illusion that we are alone, that we are separate, that our lives are small and disposable. From that wider perspective, every interaction mattered. Every kindness echoed. Every moment of presence counted far more than any accomplishment I'd ever chased. And what surprised me most was how human it all felt. There was no sense of hierarchy or superiority, no feeling that I had been chosen or elevated above anyone else. If anything, the experience dissolved that kind of thinking entirely. It showed me that whatever lies beyond this life is not reserved for the exceptional, the enlightened, or the spiritually disciplined. It is woven into all of us. Every person you pass on the street, every voice you overhear, every life unfolding quietly, invisibly, with its own weight and meaning. We are all moving through the same process, learning, forgetting, remembering, trying again. That realization softened something in me. I became gentler with people, not because I thought they were fragile, but because I knew they were carrying more than they showed. I became gentler with myself too. I stopped believing that perfection was the goal. I stopped believing that fear was a reliable guide. What mattered, again and again, came back to one simple orientation: how we treat one another when no one is watching. I didn't come back with instructions carved in stone, no commandments, no prophecies, no timeline of what comes next. What I brought back was quieter than that. A felt sense that life is not a test you pass or fail, but a process you participate in. A chance to practice awareness, a chance to practice compassion, a chance to practice remembering who we are beneath the noise. The experience didn't make me certain of everything. If anything, it made me comfortable with mystery. It taught me that not knowing is not a weakness, that doubt doesn't cancel meaning, that faith doesn't require blind belief. It can rest in lived experience, in intuition, in the way something rings true deep inside. I no longer feel the need to convince anyone. This isn't a story meant to persuade. It's an offering, a shared reflection, a hand extended across the space between us to say, "You're not imagining it. There is more, and it's closer than you think." If there is a message in all of this, one worth carrying forward, it's not about escaping this world. It's about inhabiting it more fully, about showing up with a little more patience, listening a little more deeply, loving a little more freely, even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. Because if what I experienced is true, and I know it is, then love is not a reward waiting at the end. It's the substance of the journey itself. And one day, whether gently or suddenly, each of us will step back into that wider current, not as strangers, not as outsiders, but as something that has always belonged. Until then, we're here together, learning, forgetting, remembering. If this story resonated with you, I invite you gently to subscribe, like the video, and comment "Amen" if it touched your heart.